Okay guys, welcome back. We're doing another video for you guys on flint and steel. This is going to be like one of the last times I'm going to do this subject on flint and steel for a while until I can get some sulfur. I'm going to show you guys how to make sulfur matches down the road. I'm also going to show you guys certain tins that they used in the 17th to 18th, well actually, sorry, 14, 15, all the way into the 18th and 19th century in homes. I'm going to show you the traveling tins as well as they used uh, in the 1800s for the outdoors use, and I'm going to show you the ones that they used in the homes back in the old days. But first and foremost, we're going to start out first where flint and steel started from in Neanderthal days and prehistory, which is right here. You see this guy right here, this caveman? Well, I think in between uh, the Paleolithic times and into the early Bronze Age, they used two stones to bang together in order to make a fire. Now, the stone that I'm talking about that these Bronze Age men and Neanderthal men were using was either a piece of quartz or they were using a piece of uh, chert or flint of some sort in one hand, and in the other hand they had a raw piece of pyrite. What pyrite uh, is a stone that has a lot of iron in it, and it has a lot of you know other various different materials, at nickel and stuff like that in the stone. It kind of is what they refer to as fool's gold. Now, when they used the big chunk of pyrite, it was about the size of your hand. They didn't use a little tiny piece of it. They used a big piece of it. And then on the other hand, they used a heavy stone like a flint in one hand, or a chert or a quartz in one hand, and they would hold the other one in one hand and take the flint or the chert or the quartz in the other hand and strike in a downwards motion into the pyrite, and the pyrite would bounce sparks downwards. Now, they would use these like horseshoe mushrooms, or they would call them amadou, or they would use punkwood or some sort of really ember catching type of material, and that spark would bounce down into that amber material. They would lay that material on a flat rock or a piece of birch bark, dried preferably, and they would bounce that flint off of that pyrite until that spark ignited an ember in that material, like the amadou dust or the punkwood dust. And then when they got their ember, they would take a small piece of wood and pick that ember up, stick it in a tinder bundle, and blow it to flame. That was the first early start of making fire. It's really the lazy man's way to make a fire, but it was used by Neanderthals. And there's even depictions of in Egyptian tombs 4,000 years ago of this method being used in the Bronze Age, Bronze, Copper Age, and then later on in the Roman Age, in the early Roman Empire days, they found, some guy I guess found that wrought iron could be bounced off of the pyrite in the same manner as you would with the flint on the pyrite to bounce a spark into amadou or punkwood, raw punkwood itself that's been dried, to get an ember to blow it to flame to make a fire that way as well. Early Roman times, they really didn't have a method of containing uh, and carboning, putting a lot of carbon in making a charred material. That wasn't really a method used until like the 1400s. Charring material. If they did, they either dug a hole, flattened out a piece of wood, and they would put some kind of like punky wood, or char the amadou itself and stick it in a hole and then covering it up and smothering it. But it's still the same method. A lot of these Neanderthals, they didn't want to waste their resources, but when they found Utsi Man in the Alps, I've covered this before, but he had a fire carrier on him, so they probably would have And plus that too, he had residue of pyrite in that same fire carrier as well. So he was feeding that fire while he was traveling with Amadou, basically his tender mushroom, and kept feeding that fire with Amadou to keep it going for a prolonged time until he got to another campsite or something like that to start a fire. So basically, hitting two stones together was really, it predates bow drills and stuff, because friction fires are okay, but they're not always a surefire 100% way to make a fire. But banging the pyrite and flint off of each other was always a surefire way for prehistoric men and ancient Bronze Age and Copper Age men to make a fire. So we're going to get that subject out of the way. If you don't know what pyrite is, you guys can find it. I kind of give credit to Dave Canterbury for this video. On some of the subjects we're going to touch on today in this video, I do give Dave Canterbury credit for this from his Self-Reliance School. And there's several other subjects about this out there on the internet. This is just my interpretation of the video as well, and my experience using flint and steel over the past 10-15 years that I've been using it, and I love it. I really didn't start getting a resurgence until like 15 years ago, when these survivalist guys started showing flint and steel kits on their videos and stuff like that, or on TV shows. But I do find it a very interesting subject, but you don't see a lot of them going to go into the subject of where I'm going to go and take it now. Hang on a minute, we'll get to some more stuff. Okay, guys, flint and steel has evolved for over, I don't know, probably 4 or 5, I'd say about 3,000 years. Let's say 3,000 years. When the Romans were first starting to use wrought iron strikers into the medieval times during the Holy Roman Empire, during the Crusade times, when carbon steel was being developed for swords, knives, armor, and stuff like that. Then carbon steel became more prevalent in making tools for everyday life. But before then, it was iron. The Romans kind of invented the high carbon steel in the Holy Roman Empire days, not in its early empire days. It was basically iron. And then later on, in subsequent, in the early Holy Roman days, when they had the Roman Knights and you had the French Knights, you had Vikings, English Knights and stuff like that. Probably 1,000, I like to say 1,800 years ago, started making carbon steel, and even in China was using carbon steel as well for flint and steel. They also even used brimstone matches with sulfur matches as well in the Middle Ages in Europe and places like Rome, and it just kind of spread, about that time. But we're going to look at what a early medieval flint and steel may have looked like. Now, early flint and steel kits, they basically evolved from a thick, bulky, flat piece like this, as you can see right here, or it had one single holder here in the back. But usually these were like the early, what a medieval flint and steel kit would have looked like. A flint striker would have looked like right here. It had one flat edge, not really too rounded. It kind of looked like this, but it was more straight instead of rounded. And what would happen eventually with these medieval strikers is like it would like eat away at the steel in the center of the flint and steel strikers. When you held it in one hand and struck the stone off of it, that was the preferred method in the medieval times. They were still kind of using the whole Amadou dust, like cutting the Amadou out and putting make it into a pile of dust, and then bouncing the spark directly into it in the downward motion when you held the striker in one hand and then struck the stone off of it, and it would bounce the spark downwards. The modern concept of like what you see here, this guy right here doing, is holding the charred cloth in one hand, and he's got the striker in the other hand, where he's striking it in a downward motion with the striker hitting the stone and bouncing the spark into the flint and steel. The more ancient method was holding it in one hand and then grabbing the stone and just keeping the one hand in place and then bouncing the spark off of the stone with the other hand into a, amadou dust or like boiled amadou um, type of tinder to get your ignition source. Right here, as you can see, this is a big amadou or horseshoe mushroom right here. That grows on birch trees. You can find them on red oak trees, and I've even heard rumors they grow on beech trees. I've only ever found them on oak trees and birch trees. Around here we got a lot of oak, so we do find them on oak trees, and occasionally you can find them on birch trees around here, but birch are very rare, and not a lot of people hunt these. And also another thing about amadou or amadou mushroom or tender mushroom, it has a medicinal property to it. A lot of people, or it's called chaga, it goes by many names. It also has a medicinal property to it. You can scrape the inner part of the mushroom out and get as much as you can in a pile of dust. Get yourself one of those like outdoors type of Stanley Adventure cups, fill it with water, put that dust in there, and boil it. It'll turn into like a brown liquid tea, and it has medicinal properties of antibiotics in it. And say if you were sick, you could drink that. And in the ancient times, they drank that to get rid of infections, parasites. They would lay the mushroom on wounds as an antibiotic, and it would get rid of any infection in wounds. It's just another honorable mention about the amadou. They didn't just use amadou; they used punkwood for the same process of bouncing the spark into the flame. Now they were flat, and then eventually down the road they started making these rounded edge. Now this is a flat one right here. This would have been like early 1700s. This was what a medieval flint and steel striker would have looked like right here. It would have been like one hand type of operation where you would hold it in place and bounce the spark and the stone off with the other hand. Birch. This is a guy using the same method in char cloth, holding it in one hand and then holding the striker in place and bouncing the stone in a downwards motion on a piece of char cloth. Char cloth is actually a more modern concept. You didn't start seeing char cloth until the 1700s. Char cloth is fairly new. Before then, they were using the amadou mushroom in a pile, a pile of dust on a flat, dry surface, or they were using charred. No, they were using punk wood. They would break it down, or some kind of plant that would catch a spark really well, that they could break down and turn into a small bundle of like powder or something like that. Like I said, these are more medieval striker right here. You'd hold it in one hand. Now this is more of a modern medieval striker. Now this one had more rounded edges right here. It says medieval flint and steel striker, but I think the rounded edge ones were a lot better for holding a stone and then taking the metal striker and bouncing it off. Now the way you want to do with a flint and steel striker, if you're using char cloth on the flint itself, you want to find the edge that's pointed down, flip it over, and make sure that edge is pointed up. Then lay your charred material on it, and then take your striker and bounce it off of it. That method was good for getting a spark bounced into that as well. Once you did that, you could use it for a whole host of different ways of making fire with different tinder bundles made out of grass. You could use tulip poplar bark. You could use linen. Now, they didn't really have too much jute twine back in the old days. They used linen twine, which is made from grass flax, and they made canvas with linen, and that was the main go-to, because jute is a plant that grows in Africa. It's a tree that's in Africa. It wasn't readily available for everybody. Basically, in the old days, in the 1800s, they would have used a lot of flax, linen fibers to either char or smother in smothering tins, or they would use some kind of like cattail to smother the end, whatever. But then they evolved into rounder edges. They went from flat edges to rounder edges on the flint and steel strikers, which wouldn't wear out the whole entire flint steel striker. You know what I'm saying? And those rounded edges were a lot better than just a straight flat, you know, flint striker, because it would literally just, like, when you would strike a stone in a certain way, it would just eat away at one side of the edge or the other side of the edge. You could flip it over to eat away at certain parts of the edges. Then you start having more of a rounded design. I think the rounded designs were a lot better when they evolved away from the flat, straight striker designs, because it would eat away at the middle in the flat, straight steel striker designs that you held in one hand, because you were just doing the whole bounce where down, you know, taking the stone in one hand and just bouncing it straight down into the the accelerant, which is the amadou dust, or, you know, punk wood without being charred type of method. But basically is what they would call a no char fire, um, before the advent of tinderboxes. Tinderboxes were a fairly new concept, or tinder, or tobacco tins and stuff like that, evolved in like the 14th, 15th century. Before then, they didn't do it like that. You know, like I said, they used the amadou mushroom. They would have kept the medieval flint and steel kits in a certain, like, a pouch on their belts. I'll show you what the pouch looks like, guys. Now, what we're looking at right now is a basically a copy of what they would have had in the medieval times for a survival belt. You had two things here. You had a pouch there, and then you had the round pouch. They came in different designs. You know, some were made out of, like, linen and leather. Some are just straight up leather belt pouches. Um, but this is basically what a medieval belt pouch would have looked like, guys. You know, you would have had a dagger, a sword sheath over here. Then you would have this round pouch. Now, that's where I think that the flint and steel kit would have been put on an old knight in the, 1,800 years ago, 1,300 years ago. Would have went in that pouch with a sewing kit, maybe a early, uh, medieval fishing kit made out of horsehair fibers, or some kind of, like, natural fibers with gouge hooks. A piece of flint probably would be in there with the flint and steel, with a piece of amadou mushroom, tinder mushroom, or some kind of punk porous wood with a tinder bundle, like grass, bird's nest type of material, or some kind of tree bark, or even birch bark as well, in there with a piece of flint flake. So that was basically what a medieval um, belt pouch would have looked like. You know, your common man probably just had the pouch with a small piece of, like, natural cordage material tied around his tunic, you know, with that leather belt pouch on there. Your common farmer, your peon, your peasant would have had that. Everybody would have had a survival kit on them back in the old days. I think our ancestors were better survivalists than we are. You try to put a modern day human in a survival situation now with no skills whatsoever, that dude's going to die within a couple days. Because, they say the body can only live a few days without water, and you could live a few weeks without food. So put that there. But yeah, this is what an early medieval survival belt would have looked like. Now, they did still use basically what they called a flint and steel wallet in the 1700s as well, which was made out of leather. You could put a piece of flint and steel in there. You put a magnifying lens in there, and then they would have carried a tobacco tin with it or without it. It was either or, It was kind of a mixed bag of, type of uh, damned if you do and damned if you don't. But most guys in the early 1700s did carry a sort of a tin on them. Some of the tins were made out of brass. There were tobacco tins. They were made out of brass. Some of them were, they had a lid on top where you pulled it off, and there was a divider in the middle, like a wood divider, where you put your flint and steel on one side and then your charred materials on the other side to smother, where you put the lid back on, you take fire tongs, stick your punk wood or your amadou in one, in the fire directly, and just char the very tip of it and put it in there, close the lid off and smother it. It's called the smothering method. A lot of people don't know about the smothering method. They just use the weeping hole method that people have showed on these survival TV shows and stuff, but they don't really talk about the smothering method, which is even far older than the weeping tin method, where you take an Altoids tin, put a hole on top of it, put some cotton, 100% cotton type of material in there, close it up, throw it in the fire. That little hole will smoke like white smoke in it until it burns off and you don't see no more white smoke coming out of the hole. That's called the weeping tin method. And then you have the smothering method. I've got a video on how to do that. You guys can go check that out. But this is basically a medieval knight's belt. What it would have looked like, even for a peasant. You know, he would have had his flint and steel kit in there. You know, his papers, his quill, his pen, his ink in here as well. You know, you would have like a small like stone, what they called an ink stone, that they would rub on another stone and add a little water to it, and then use a quill pen with like some kind of foam material in it to write on parchment or papyrus or a leather skin to write on, because knights were very intelligent people. This is what it would look like right here. It's very small, but in that little pouch, you would have had a way to carry other stuff, not just phones, but they probably carried other tools like fire making tools in here, like fire tongs and stuff like that, made out of iron or carbon steel. You know what I'm saying? So this is what a flint and steel kit would have went in for a knight or a squire or just some peasant out working on the farm. Had to carry this stuff on them at all times for survival. Okay, guys, now what you're looking at here is a set of early American tinderbox candle holders. Not really antique vintage, more modern, but this is basically what they would use in most homes in between the 1300s. Now we're getting into the more modern tins. This is what been in most early homes from the 1400s, well, maybe 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, early 1800s to the mid 1800s. Then they were kind of replaced by matches. Now in this candle holder tin, they would have put like an extra candle in here. They would have put a flint and steel in here. Now this would have been about the time they started using charred cloth or linen. Not so much charred cotton, but definitely linen fabric. They would have used burlap. They would have charred it in the weeping method back then, or they would have smothered the tip of it in the fire and then used the tin itself when they opened it up to basically smother it out, just the tip of it, because cloth was a lot better than charred punk wood and stuff like that for lighting candles. But basically this is a tin. Actually, you could open the top of this up, and inside you could put your flint and steel, your sulfur matches, and this is where the sulfur matches kind of came into play in the early 14 1500s, early 16 1700s, mid 1800s. They would have these type of candle tins over the fireplaces or their wood stoves, with sulfur matches in them, a charred type of cloth inside with a flint and steel. Now you could open these up, and inside those would be in there. You would take the charred cloth and take your flint and steel and bang, the flint and steel on top of the flint. You bang the flint, you hit the striker on that flint charred cloth, and then you take that charred cloth while it's getting red and stick it on a dry surface like a stone surface or something. You take that sulfur match and stick the direct tip of that sulfur match or brimstone match in there, and then you blow on it until that sulfur match catches flame. And then once you do that, you can light your candle right here. This is what they would have had. You could light your candle, and if you got a fireplace with all the tinder and your smalls already ready to go to light your fireplace, you can take what's left of that match and light your fireplace at the same time to get your fire going in your fireplace, and then light your candle at the same time. These are really interesting, and you could buy these. I could not believe I found them online, and you can get these on Amazon, guys. I couldn't believe it. I'm not sponsored by them at all, but I'm definitely going to get one of these. These are going to be in my house with some candles. Very interesting. I couldn't believe I found them, actually. I do a lot of research on ancient fire making and what they had in their homes. This is very important because our ancestors used these for survival. And this is what have been in every home in the early 1700s, 1600s, all the way back in the Columbus time. They would have had these in their homes, or they would have had them on ships, basically as the early tins. These are also smothering tins as well. If you wanted to add more punk wood or smother some kind of like cattail or something in there, you could, take fire tongs, grab it, stick it in the fire, get that tip charred up, stick it in there, and then close it off. And the oxygen will close it off, and it would get a lot of carbon in it, and you could just light the tip of it. You know what I'm saying? With a flint and steel striker, and when you do that, you could light these candles. You know what I'm saying? That's how they did it back in the old days. Now this was in homes. Now this is something you wouldn't quite carry on you out in the field. That's something you might want to take to a cabin, like a hunting cabin from your main home. But taking it out in the field, it wasn't. You wouldn't really want to do that because they're heavy. They weren't heavy, but they were loud and noisy. You wouldn't want to carry one in your pack because you would scare animals away and stuff like that. But I'm going to show you the next 10 that they would have used either in homes or out in the field as well in the early 14, 15, 16, 17, all the way into the 1800s. Now, the next 10 that I'm going to show you guys is what they probably would have used in the field themselves. This is an early tobacco tinderbox. This is basically what guys would have put pipes in. They would have put some linen twine in here with their flint and steel kits and some sulfur matches to light their pipes. Same concept with the candlestick, the home candlestick flint and steel smothering kit. This is to smother their punk wood or amadou mushrooms in here. They would light the tips up in a fire with some fire tongs, throw it in here, close it off to make smothered punk wood, amadou, or some kind of plant material that was good for smothering and charring. They would throw it in here with their tobacco as well. They would take the flint and steel, bang it either with the in place method and bang the stone directly down into the tinder to get their sulfur matches going, or they would have put some char cloth in the other hand and banged it into an ember and light their sulfur match on it to light their pipes. That's how they did it, guys. I'm not kidding you. This is how they lit their pipes. They put their tobacco in these tins with it. This is just one tin that I'm going to show you. This is like the Hudson Bay era, early 1700 tins that they might have had laying around the house. Not just besides the candle smothering box, tinder tins. This was another tin that they used for that as well. And the next tin that we're going to talk about is another tin that they used in the Hudson Bay era. Now this is more into we're getting into the early 1800s, like 1805 all the way into 1840, during the trapper days. Now this is a unique tin. I think this is one of the coolest tins that I'm going to show you so far that they made as a tobacco tin. Now underneath this little cap right here is a magnification lens that they would use to either directly light their pipes, their tobacco pipes, or they would have put it on they would have directed a solar beam into a piece of charred material, and then they would have lit a sulfur match. The sulfur matches would have been in here as well to light their pipes. They would have kept a flint and steel striker kit in here as well with flint and steel, with the brimstone matches right along with some linen twine or some kind of amadou mushroom in here as well. Very interesting. We're getting more advanced now, and these are still, being sold. You could buy this on Amazon as well for 30 bucks. The other one and the candlestick one as well, if you want one as like a decor type of thing, would have it around your house, but it's still a practical survival tool, guys. And you could put these as your survival kits, or you could put them in your survival kits with flint and steel. I still think, just my own opinion, flint and steel kits are the best fire starters on the planet. They last a lot longer than your ferrocerium rods. They're they're an old way of making fire, basically traditional way of making fire that still to this day is still a good way to make fire. I love it, and I love everything about flint and steel. I think a lot of people love flint and steel because it's a unique way to make a fire. I say it's a lazy man's way to make a fire. Yeah, I can make friction fire. I mean, but finding all the right woods, hard to punky, to make your hearth boards, to get your bearing blocks, and a hard piece of spindle wood to make a bow drill, and you gotta use a boot string, or you gotta use a damn you can use rawhide cordage or natural cordage out of dog's bane, or ju- uh, tulip bark, or basswood bark, or cottonwood, cedar. Make a good hearthboard, for a bow drill. Um, Also, too, it takes a lot of energy away from you for doing other survival tasks. Trying to make a hand drill or a bow drill, uh, to where you can make it easier fire by using a flint and steel, or maybe using a ferrocerium rod or matches. If you have the availability to buy this stuff, please buy it, guys. Buy it. It will save your life. It saves energy in a survival situation or just a camping situation. You want to make a fire like the old timers did, and some people still use these methods. Even cowboys still use these methods. I've even seen cowboys making bow drills and stuff, and using hand drills out of, like, you know, uh, horseweed spindles, and using a punky piece of non-sappy wood like tulip poplar or basswood or cottonwood hearthboards, and spitting on their hands and making friction fires with hand drills. I mean, I'm not going to waste my time doing that, but if you want to do something like that, practice it. Yeah, it may come in handy if you don't have anything. I'm saying, to start a fire, like a modern implement to making fire. But the old ways are always the better ways, guys. I've had a lot of success, in my own opinion, with flint and steel kits, and these tins are awesome. I think everybody should have either an Altoids tin in their kits, or you want to get really fancy. The tins that I just showed, the old school tins, are just as good, guys. And I'm showing you the evolution of flint and steel from the striker, from Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age to the Carbon Steel Age, medieval times, all the way into, like, what we would call the Industrial Age times, of when they were using flint and steel kits. The tins they used in the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s, almost all the way into the 1900s, and then now the resurgence of the tobacco tin slash flint and steel kits coming back into popularity again, guys. Um, these tins are pretty cool. Now, these are not the only tins that they used. These are really interesting tins. They come in three different colors. You have, like, a steel one, you have a bronze one, and you have a copper one. Some of these have magnification lenses in them, and they're really cool because it gives you three ways to make a fire, either with flint and steel or solar fire. So you have that way, and you have sulfur matches in here as well, to make three ways to make a fire. Traditional ways to make a fire with this tin. Now, this is like Hudson Bay era, like early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, all the way into the mountain man days, that they might have carried on them. But mostly they carried a little leather belt pouch, like I showed, like in medieval times. They even carried those with them, but they carried these tins with them too, because they had to use these to smother natural materials. Most of the time they were smothering more natural materials than they were like cloth, or like linen or burlap or cotton. They weren't really smothering those too much. They were more of into smothering natural materials that they found out in the wild with these smothering tins, because cotton was expensive. They didn't always wear cotton shirts. They were mainly wearing linen stuff, wool, buckskin stuff. I mean, I don't know if you could char buckskin. I'm sure if there's a will, there's a way. Okay, now we're getting off of this subject, and okay, guys, I hope you like the evolution of flint and steel. And some of this stuff, you can still buy this stuff online, guys. You can make yourself a wish list on Amazon. And if you want to buy one thing after another later on down the road, you could do that as well. Most of the stuff that I showed you guys can be had on various different websites. I'm not going to end the video quite yet. I'm going to show you modern examples of flint and steel that you can get on Amazon and other various websites. You can get them on Walmart.com for 12 bucks just for the strikers. The stones, on the other hand, you may have to find them yourselves out near creek beds. Go out back, crack some stones open that you think look all smooth and glassy. You take a stone and bounce it off of other stones in your creek beds. If you get like a metal tinging noise, like ding, 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 ding on a stone with another stone, usually that's like either quartz, flint, chert, or some kind of like quartz. And usually those four stones are usually really good stones for flint and steel kits. You can find your own stones, or you can buy your own flint online. That's another option for you guys to get flint online. Amadou, you can find on, if you live like in the Midwest, like in Minnesota and places like Michigan and places like that where there's a lot of birch trees, you're going to find horseshoe mushrooms a lot. You don't really find them here too much. Occasionally, I've only ever found one. In my whole time I've lived here, I've only ever found one Amadou mushroom or chaga, and that was near a river. Usually birch trees like growing near water or swampy areas. That's where you're going to find a lot of that stuff. I mean, don't rely on it though, because you might be in an area where they don't got birch trees, and there's a lot of carnivorous trees like poplar and oak and hickory. Now, if you find a dead tree laying on the ground, you could source punk wood out of there and take that back to your campsite out, let it dry out on a stone in the sun, or keep it covered or in a tinder bag or something like that, and keep it underneath your coat, and your body heat will dry it off. Any tinder that you're using, if it's damp, stick it in a tinder bag, stick it underneath your coat for a couple hours, and a forging bag, and stick that underneath your coat. Boom, stuff will dry out like that, you know what I'm saying? And you be good to go, you know what I'm saying, to get your fire going. But keep always adding that tinder into your stuff. Once you use it, you got to go find more and do it over and over and over again. Grass is a good bird's nest. Tulip poplar bark is a good bird's nest. Basswood, cottonwood, yucca leaves make a good, dried yucca leaves make a really good tinder bundle. Ogava makes a good tinder bundle for fire making if you're out in the Southwest. You could use that as a tinder bundle as well with flint and steel. Yucca does grow here. I couldn't believe I found a few yucca plants here, and it does grow here in West Virginia. And it's a little bit rarer than, say, out west. Out west, they grow everywhere. But here, they do grow, but they're not a lot of them. And, yucca, there's a lot of uses for yucca. Other besides using the dried leaves for tinder, you could take the dried leaves and turn it into cordage, some of the best cordage there is, and wax it down, and you can make yourself fishing line, or you can make yourself fishing traps with that cordage. You could do that with tulip poplar. You could do that with basswood bark. You could do that with cedar bark as well, to make cordage and stuff, fire tenders out of these plants. Dog's bane is another weed that you could do. Cat's tail. The inner stalks of cat's tail, you make cordage. You use the dried stalks to make tinder bundles out of. Milkweed is also another plant that you could use when it's dried to make cordage or tinder bundles out of. I mean, I've done it before, and it is a way to get tinder bundles or cordage out of it. But you have to wax it down if you want to waterproof that cordage. And making cordage is a pain in the butt, guys. I've done it before, and you don't get a whole lot of it. You know what I'm saying? And it takes a lot of time. So if you guys want to save the time, buy some bank line, or buy some paracord, but that's not a limitless resource. I mean, you will run out of that, and then you may have to use natural cordage to build stuff with later on. Again, here's another flint steel striker for $10. You don't necessarily gotta buy like the whole kit, like I was talking about earlier, but you can buy the separate stuff like those tins I showed earlier to get yourself a flint and steel striker. This one has good stars on it, I guess. It's called the PK Ook Pusk flint and I can't say it, I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic, but you can buy one of these. They got a bunch of different ones on here, but you can buy one for $11, and just find an Altoids tin laying around your house, and build yourself a decent flint and steel kit. I mean, there's ferrocerium rods here. You got like jute twine, wax canvas bags that you can buy as well. Right here is a fire starter survival kit, ferro rod, blah blah blah. You can buy the leather pouch like that if you want. It's $37. It's not like you're losing a lot of money, and you could probably put other stuff in there just besides that flint and steel kit there as a foraging bag. Well, of flint and steel kits also too, Dave Canterbury makes his own flint and steel striker on the Primitive Self-Reliance website as well. I could show you that real quick before we end the video. Hang on. And we're on the Dave Canterbury Self-Reliance store as well. Before we end the video, I'm gonna show you some of the stuff on the Dave Canterbury Self-Reliance Outfitters store, which is, he's got some good stuff, guys. Don't take it from me, but you will spend a little bit more money on the flint and steel kits on here. Like I said, they have some that are rounded and have like arrowhead style flint and steel bow drill divot type of designs. Some are like the traditional flint and steel kits with the little tins. Some come with the bags without the tin, which are cheaper. You can buy one of those if you want. They're all effective, like I said earlier when I showed you on the Hudson Bay flint and steel kits, they also got those for $49 with the magnification lens on top. I'd recommend just buying this one if you guys really want a flint and steel kit that is period correct for the Hudson Bay era, or an old school flint and steel kit, smothering kit, this tobacco tin kit. I'd get this one because it's already $49. It's made out of brass. You don't have to spend $39 on Amazon to get it. You know what I'm saying? So you can get it over there too. You can get different types of tins. Screw on top lid tins are the best. They're a little bit better than Altoids tins because you don't need a Ranger band on them to keep them in place. And that's pretty much it, guys. Well, if you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell me what you think of this video. Y'all take it easy. It's been your old pal Hondo. Peace out.